Hi everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day, and I hope you've taken your lunch already. And we are the second group. We'll be featuring the theories of language learning in relation to language testing and assessment. So meet our team. First, we have our Kalinawan Athrin, Kambal Phoebe Marie, Kanyada Lord J. Mar, Karungay Shane May, Quartharo Adhara. We have Dinoy Mary Ann, Duhiling Ivy, Edoliantes Rizal May, Olguera Mia, and Francisco Claire.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you have all eaten lunch now so you can have energy for our lesson today. For today, we are going to talk about the theories of language learning. I think everyone is already familiar about the theory of language learning, right? Do you still remember about John Piaget, Noam Chomsky, about the cognitive theory, nativist theory? Kaya nandun pa mga to? Thumbs up if you still remember those. Because that is our topic for today, which is the theories of language learning. Here are our learning objectives. Number one, identify key principles of various language learning theories and their implications for language assessment. Number two, explain how different language learning theories influence language assessment strategies. Number three, evaluate the role of various language learning theories in designing language assessments. Number four, understand how different learning theories can help you choose the right kind of assessment methods. Number five, apply knowledge of different learning theories to select appropriate assessment methods for various language learning objectives. For the overview of the topic, this lesson will explore how various language learning theories can inform the design and implementation of language assessments. And we will delve into the key concept of behaviorism, cognitism, nativism, and interactionism, examining their implications for language assessment practices. And by understanding these connections, students will gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of language assessment and the factors that influence its effectiveness.
Hi everyone. Now we will first talk about the first language learning theory in relation to language testing and assessment, which is the behavioral learning theory or behaviorism. So, what is the behavioral learning theory or behaviorism? I know every one of you is somewhat familiar to it because we've already tackled this topic, but it's different this time because we'll be relating it we'll be talking about its interconnectedness to language testing and assessment. Just a quick runabout. Behaviorism or the behavioral learning theory is a popular concept that focuses on how students learn. Behaviorism focuses on the idea that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment. This learning theory states that behaviors are learned from the environment and says that innate or inherited factors have very little influence on behavior. Behavioral learning theory in language learning or testing and assessment, it's it posits that learning is a process of acquiring new behavior through conditioning involving stimuli and responses. In the context of language learning, behaviorism emphasizes repetition, reinforcement, and imitation as key mechanisms through which learners develop linguistic skills. Let's now explore how this theory aligns with the learning objectives related to language testing and assessment. Now we will talk about the key principles of behaviorism. First, we have language learning occurs through imitation, practice, and reinforcement. Learners acquire language by mimicking others, repeatedly practicing language patterns, and receiving feedback that strengthens correct usage. Second, we have correct language use is reinforced positively, while incorrect responses may be ignored or corrected. When learners use language correctly, they receive rewards, that is, praise or reinforcing their behavior. Mistakes are either corrected immediately or not reinforced, discouraging their repetition. So the last one, we have focus on observable behaviors, that is pronunciation, grammar accuracy, rather than internal cognitive processes. Uh, Behaviorism emphasizes measuring learners' visible performance, such as pronunciation and grammar accuracy, without considering their mental processes or understanding. So now let's move forward to the relationship of behaviorism to language testing and assessment. First, we have the focus on observable behavior. Behaviorism emphasizes measurable, observable behavior, which directly impacts on how language is tested. In language testing, behaviorists would design assessments that focus on objective outcomes like correct pronunciation, grammar usage, vocabulary recall, and sentence structure. This translates into tasks like multiple choice questions, fill in the blank exercises, dictation, and oral repetition tasks, where there is a clear right or wrong answer. And the second one, which is the reinforcement and feedback, one of the core tenets of behaviorism is the importance of reinforcement. In language assessment, this means that immediate feedback is provided to learners, allowing them to learn from their mistakes and reinforce correct language forms. For instance, language drills or computerized language tests might give instant results or correction, helping learners to build correct habits through continuous repetition. And then the third one, we have testing for mastery. In this one, behaviorist assessments focus on testing for specific measurable language skills like grammar, syntax, and phonology. The goal is to measure mastery of these discrete language elements. And assessments under this one are often criterion referenced, meaning that they measure the learner's ability to meet predetermined standards rather than their creative use of language. So this makes behaviorist approaches highly effective in assessing whether learners can reproduce language forms accurately. And then the fourth one, we have the role of repetition in testing. Since behaviorism relies on repetition as a means of learning, language assessments tied to this theory often include tasks that require students to repeat words, phrases, or structures multiple times. And then testing formats such as pattern drills, cloze tests, and substitution drills are common because they emphasize habit formation through consistent practice. And then the last one, we have skill building assessments. And in behaviorism, language learning is seen as a cumulative process where simpler skills build toward more complex ones. As such, language testing under this theory often follows a structured progressive format where early assessments focus on basic grammar and vocabulary, and then later tests assess more complex sentence structures. And then we also have summative assessments, which are tasks given at the end of a learning cycle, and they're designed to measure whether learners have successfully internalized the language habits they've practiced. So moving on, we'll have the implications of behaviorism for language testing and assessment. First, the one on the center. Um, assessment assessment based on behaviorism would focus more on accuracy, fluency, and the repetition of correct language forms. Behaviorism, it's because of the focus on behaviorism. They focus on repetition and correct forms, which can sometimes neglect the communicative aspect of language, meaning that tests may not fully assess how well learners can use language in dynamic real world interactions. Then we have objective tests to evaluate observable for performance. And then that's tests like multiple choice and fill in the blank are used to measure language learning based on visible behavior such as correct grammar or word use. And then we also have drills or tasks to demonstrate mastery through repetition. Assessment tools. Assessments often involve exercises that require learners to repeatedly perform language tasks such as sentence completion to show consistent mastery. And then we also have the reliability. So in this one, behaviors approaches often result in tests that are highly reliable because they are designed to minimize ambiguity in answers. Objective tests like multiple choice or closed tests ensure consistent scoring across different test takers. And then last one, we also have the validity concerns in real world proficiency. It's while behaviorist tests are excellent at assessing specific language structures, they may lack construct validity if the goal is to measure a learner's overall language proficiency, including creativity and use in real life contexts. So now we will be talking about the behavioral influence on assessment strategies in relation to their role. In relation to the role of behaviorism in designing language assessments. So we'll cover two of them. So in a behaviorist framework, language assessment strategies prioritize performance-based testing, such as oral repetition, drills, or role playing. And when it comes to the role of behaviorism in designing language assessments, performance-based testing, there are behaviors-inspired assessments. Their aim to measure language recall, pronunciation, grammar usage, and habit formation. So since there are just three of behavioral influences, the second one is the immediate feedback, which is crucial because reinforcing correct language patterns and discouraging errors. So in relation to the role of behaviorism, these assessments would use tools like structured dialogues or scripted conversations to evaluate learners' ability to repeat and use correct language structures. And then the last one, we have the criterion reference. Assessments are criterion reference, meaning learners are judged based on meeting specific linguistic standards rather than on creative use of language or understanding complex meanings. And in designing language assessments, tests may be designed to provide incremental difficulty, helping learners build language proficiency step by step. Okay, so the last topic we will be talking about or we will be tackling about under the behaviorism would be their applications. So, behaviorist frameworks, assessment methods should align with the goal of reinforcing correct responses and minimizing errors. So first, for objectives focus on mastery of pronunciation or grammatical forms, behaviors-based assessments would involve repetition tasks, sentence completion, or matching exercises, like quizzes, oral exams, and structured language drills are appropriate methods because they emphasize repetition and recall. And then for objectives centered on building language fluency, assessments may involve structured speaking tasks where learners practice and repeat dialogues in specific contexts. Immediate correction through feedback during this process is critical because it reinforces the correct behaviors. So, all in all, in summary, behaviorism shapes language assessment by focusing on measurable, observable behaviors. Assessments under this theory prioritize accuracy, correct repetition, and habit formation, which with strategies aimed at reinforcing correct language use through immediate feedback. And this approach is particularly useful in early stage language learning, where the focus is on mastery of basic language forms.
And now, let's move on to the next theory, which is the cognitive theory. Have you already heard about this theory before? I believe yes, because as far as I remember, we already talked about this one during our previous courses. So, when we say cognitive theory, it is grounded in the idea that individuals must first understand a concept before they can use language to express it. It argues that in order to understand new concept, children or adults must develop their cognitive abilities and build their own image of the world. Cognitive theory is based on the idea that children are born with limited cognitive ability upon which all new knowledge can be built. Knowledge can be developed via building blocks of knowledge named schemas. So, the cognitive theory emerged as a response to behaviorism, which dominated psychology and education in the early 20th century. Behaviorism focused on observable behaviors, leaving little room to understand what goes on inside the learner's mind. The cognitive revolution shifted the focus to the mental processes involved in learning, such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. This paradigm shift has had profound implications for how we assess learning. So you might be wondering, who is the key theorist of this theory since we are talking about cognitive theory? And what are the concepts of this theory? Alright, so the key theorist of this theory is Jean Piaget. He is a Swiss psychologist and a genetic epistemologist. He developed a theory of human cognitive development known as genetic epistemology. He is a renowned he is a renowned theorist who paved the way for cognitive psychology, emphasizing the importance of a learner's developmental stage. Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through distinct stages, each with its own characteristics and abilities. Understanding the stages is crucial for creating assessments that are aligned with the learner's cognitive capabilities. Moving forward with the concepts of this theory, we have here the schema. So Piaget's cognitive theory posits schema as the core of one's ability to build mental models of the world. So basically, schemas are mental structures that organize knowledge and guide behavior. They are the basic building blocks of cognitive development. As children interact with their environment, they develop and modify their schemas to better understand the world around them. For example, a child may have a schema for a dog that includes four legs, fur, and a tail. When they encounter a cat, they may initially try to fit the cat into their existing dog schema before developing a new schema for cats. And we have here the second concept, which is the assimilation. So actually, assimilation and accommodation, which is the third concept of this theory, uh, Piaget identified these two as the key processes that enable children to adapt their schemas to new information. So which is the assimilation and the accommodation. So let's talk first about the word assimilation. So when we say assimilation, it is a process by which a person takes in information and incorporates it into pre-existing ideas and schemas. It plays a key role in cognitive development by allowing individuals to integrate new experiences and knowledge. For example, a child with a schema for birds may assimilate a new bird species into their existing schema. So we have here the second adaptation process, which is the accommodation. It is a modifying existing schemas or creating new ones to accommodate new information that does not fit into existing schemas. For example, a child may need to accommodate their bird schema when they learn that penguins cannot fly. So we have here the last concept of this theory called cognitive theory, which is the equilibration. It is the process of balancing assimilation and accommodation to create a stable understanding of the world. When children encounter new information that does not fit into their existing schemas, they experience cognitive disequilibrium. They then work to restore equilibrium by adapting their schemas through assimilation and accommodation. Equilibration helps explain how children shift from one stage through the next. Piaget's theory of cognitive development revolves around the central idea that intelligence develops as children grow. Piaget believed that cognitive development occurs as a child's mind evolves through a series of set stages until they reach adulthood. Piaget called this the four stages of cognitive development. So the first stage is the sensory motor stage. From birth to about 2 years, children experience the world through their senses and actions. This stage is characterized by infants learning through interacting with the environment using their senses and motor movements. Object permanence, the understanding that objects exist even when out of sight. It is a key development milestone in this stage. For example, an infant explores a toy by shaking it, watching how it moves, learning cause and effect. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. From 2 to 7 years, children begin to think symbolically but are not yet able to understand complex logic. They engage in symbolic play and learn to manipulate symbols but do not yet understand concrete logic. Egocentrism, where a child views the world from their own perspective only, is particularly evident in this stage. So, for example, a child uses a banana as a pretend phone, showing imaginative play but struggles with understanding others' perspectives. So, the third stage is the concrete operational stage, from 7 to 11 years. Children start to think logically about concrete events. They understand the principles of conservation and are able to think logically about objects and events as long as they are concrete and observable. For example, a child can understand that if you pour water from a short, wide glass into a tall, narrow one, the amount of water remains the same. And the last stage we have here is the formal operational stage. From adolescence to adulthood, individuals develop the ability to think about abstract concepts and hypothetical situations. Individuals develop the ability to think abstractly, reason logically, and form hypotheses. Adolescents begin to think about moral, philosophical, ethical, social, and political issues in deeper way. For example, a teenager can think abstractly about hypothetical scenarios like considering the implications of a new law on society. So, when it comes to the assessment of learning, traditional approaches often emphasize memorization and the regurgitation of information. However, the cognitive perspective on assessment pushes us to think differently about how we evaluate learning. It's not just about what you know, but how you process and apply that knowledge. So in cognitive theory, there are also the assessment as a continuous and adaptive process of learning. So we have here the formative assessment versus summative assessment. So, in the context of the cognitive perspective, formative assessment plays a key role, unlike summative assessment, which evaluates learning at the end of an instructional period. Formative assessment is interwoven throughout the learning process. This type of assessment provides immediate feedback and allows for adjustments to be made in real time, catering to the cognitive needs of the learner. So, for instance, after introducing a new concept in math, the teacher might ask students to solve a problem individually and then share their answers. Based on the students' responses, the teacher can immediately identify who understands the material and who may need more support. These allow the teacher to adjust their instruction on the spot, perhaps by providing additional explanations or small group practice, thereby enhancing student understanding in real time. And we have here the second one, which is the feedback and metacognition. So, feedback is central to the cognitive perspective. It should be constructive and geared towards helping learners understand their own thought processes, a concept known as metacognition. So, this self awareness can empower learners to take control of their learning using feedback to make informed decisions about study strategies and problem solving approaches. Constructive feedback helps students identify what they did well and where they can improve, fostering self awareness about their learning strategies. This empowerment enables learners to adjust their approaches to studying and problem solving, making more informed choices that enhance their overall academic performance. By actively engaging with feedback, students become more autonomous learners, capable of self regulating their progress. One size does not fit all when it comes to cognitive development. It's essential to employ diverse assessment methods to address the wide range of cognitive abilities in a classroom. So, in cognitive theory, there are diverse methods of assessment for varied cognitive development. We have here the first one, which is observations. So, by watching how students interact with material, educators can gain insights into their cognitive processes. For example, if a teacher observes the students excel in group discussions but struggle with independent tasks, they can tailor instruction to include more collaborative activities, fostering deeper understanding. We have here the second one, which is interviews. Conversations with students can reveal their understanding and thought patterns. For instance, if a student explains a science concept in their own words during an interview, it can highlight their grasp of the material and inform the teacher on how to further challenge or support the student, ultimately enhancing learning outcomes. So we have here the third one, which is performance task, which is, I believe that it is very common and it is very familiar to you, right? Okay, right. So performance task, this task requires students to apply their knowledge in a practical context, demonstrating their cognitive skills. This approach not only solidifies understanding but also develops critical thinking and problem solving skills, making learning more relevant and impactful. So we have here the next one, portfolios, which I believe also that it is really familiar because since high school we already talk about this one. We are already introduced by this one. So portfolios is a collection of a student's work over time. It can show the progression of cognitive abilities. By collecting a variety of student work over time, portfolios provide a comprehensive view of students' growth. For example, a portfolio that includes initial writing samples alongside polished final drafts demonstrates progress and encourages students to reflect on their learning journey, boosting motivation and self esteem. So we have here the last one, which is the self-assessments. It is encouraging students to evaluate their own work can foster metacognitive skills and self-regulations, which I believe in self-assessment. We always do this one. It's whether in school or in it at the house when we are making a decision, or when we are going to assess our performance in school, if we really improve or we need to practice more. And for instance, when students identify strengths and areas for improvement after a project, they become more proactive in their learning, leading to a better academic performance and increased ownership of their education. So, as what I've said earlier, that we always self-assess to determine whether we improve or we still in the same place as we are before. So the cognitive perspective on learning assessment challenges traditional notions of what it means to evaluate learning. By considering the mental processes behind learning and recognizing the developmental stages of learners, we can create assessments that are not only more effective but also more humane. It's about nurturing the growth of the mind, not just measuring its contents.
Now, let us tackle what is nativist theory. Nativist theory is a perspective in linguistics and psychology that suggests humans are biologically predisposed to acquire language, with innate capacity to learn it. This theory posits that children are born with a universal grammar, enabling them to understand the structure of any language they are exposed to, thus emphasizing the role of nature over nurture in language development. Now, let me ask everyone, do you believe in this? Or among all the theories, like say, in the end of this lesson, let us see which one would you believe so. All right, which one do you think is the right theory that should be the first one to acquire the language? Now, Noam Chomsky said that children are hardwired with the ability to learn language. It is focused around the fact that the children often receive impoverished input from the adults around them. Now, people often use incorrect grammar, and babies can only hear a small sample of language. Therefore, to acquire language, children must already possess a linguistic framework in their brains that is activated by the input they receive. Okay, now, in addition to that, we have here the word language acquisition device, or LAD. It is a hypothetical area of the brain that explains how children can learn languages so quickly. Okay? Now do you think, is this the fact? Now let us think. The way, let's try to think back when we were still a baby. Is this actually true? That we're acquiring it just by our own? We have functioned it on our own? All right, maybe yes, maybe no, right? Because before we actually started going to school, we can already speak, and we didn't learn grammar from that point, right?
So how will nativist theory be assessed? First is the vocabulary test. It assesses how well learners connect with words to their meanings through representation. So we can use objects, pictures, videos, or posters to represent vocabulary words. This helps in assessing learners' understanding of vocabulary by connecting words to visual or contextual representations. For example, we can show an image of a tree and ask students to select the correct vocabulary word that represents it. Next is the sentence compositions. It tests the ability of students to construct meaningful sentences. Following the nativist perspective that language development is an inherent ability, we can provide learners with a jumbled group of words and have them organize these words into a grammatically correct and meaningful sentence. For example, we can provide the words cat, the, on, seats, and mat. So the correct sentence composition would be the cat sits on the mat. And lastly, the comprehension. It evaluates the learner's understanding of language through comparing positive and negative understandings. So we can present learners with two passages or statements, one with positive phrasing and one with negative phrasing, and have them compare the meanings. For example, we can give two sentences such as the weather was pleasant yesterday and the weather was not pleasant yesterday, and then ask students to explain how these sentences convey opposite meanings. So by using these types of assessments, teachers can target different areas of language learning, ensuring that students not only memorize words but also understand how to use them correctly in sentences and comprehend their meanings in context.
Now let's go to the interactionist theory. The interactionist theory views language learning as a dynamic process that emerges through social interaction. And the key principles include: first, language is learned through meaningful communication and interaction with others. Second, language learning is a collaborative process between the learner and their environment. And third, learners actively construct their own understanding of language through this interaction. The interactionist theory of language learning posits that language learning or acquisition is fundamentally a social process, wherein interaction plays a crucial role in the development of linguistic skills. This theory has significant implications for language testing and assessment, particularly in how assessments are designed and implemented to foster meaningful interactions among learners. Okay, let's now go to the implications for language testing and assessment. First, we have the focus on communicative competence. Interactionist theory emphasizes assessing a learner's ability to use language communicatively, rather than just their own knowledge of language rules and structures. This shifts the focus of assessment from discrete language skills to the integrated use of language for communication. Second, we have the authentic and interactive assessment task. So, as we all know that assessments should involve tasks that mirror real-world language use, such as the basic one, role plays or discussions, and information gap activities that really require interaction. This allows for the evaluation of a learner's ability to negotiate meaning and engage in dynamic and collaborative language use. Assessment tasks should be designed to elicit language use in collaborative, negotiated contexts rather than just isolated language skills. Okay, then we also have formative and ongoing assessment. Research indicates that both explicit and implicit feedback are vital for learners to negotiate meaning and improve their language skills. For instance, we have from the study of Gao et al., the study highlights that online peer feedback allows learners to receive both positive and negative inputs, which they can use to modify their interlanguage and enhance their writing abilities. Assessment should also be an ongoing process that provides feedback to support the learner's language development, not just a final summative evaluation. So, formative assessment strategies such as we have self-assessment, that could be peer feedback, and teacher-learner conferences should be integrated into the design of language assessments. Okay, and assessments should be integrated into the learning process to monitor progress and guide instruction. Okay, so therefore we know that, sorry for the noise, assessment is not just a test of the knowledge of the students, but it is also a process to monitor progress and guide instruction. Then we also have collaborative and co-constructed assessments. So here, assessments can involve collaboration between the learner and teacher or among other learners. This is to evaluate language use in an interactive content. Okay. Assessment design should incorporate opportunities for learners to work together since it is an interaction. Okay. Negotiate meaning and co-construct language use in an interactive context. This reflects the social and collaborative nature of language learning emphasized by the interactionist theory. By focusing on how learners interact with assessment tasks, educators can gain insights into their cognitive processes and provide targeted support as well. Next, we also have consideration of social-cultural factors. So assessments should account for the socio-cultural context in which language is used and how it impacts the learner's performance. Okay? Interactionist theory recognizes that language use is influenced by the socio-cultural context in which it occurs. So I believe that we all know this, that assessments should account for how factors such as our cultural norms, the power dynamics, and social roles impact our ability and the ability of the learner, the learner's language performance. Okay. Then we also have flexibility and adaptability. So assessments should be flexible and adaptable to accommodate the dynamic and the variable nature of language learning. Assessments should be flexible and adaptable, this is to accommodate the diverse needs and experiences of learners. So because we have different kinds of learners, they have different kinds of preferences, and they have different kinds of needs as well. So this would really know where we should guide them, and so that the evolving nature of their language would really develop. Okay. Language testing and assessment can be designed to more accurately and holistically evaluate a learner's communicative competence. And this is to also support their ongoing language development, okay, by incorporating interactionist theory. Okay, so we have here performance-based assessments. Tasks that require learners to demonstrate their ability to use language in authentic, interactive contexts, such as, then again, we have role plays, right? The simulations. We also have interviews, discussions, okay? Those are common assessments, or we also have information gap activities, okay? Next, we also have portfolios. So we all know that portfolios is the collection of learners' work that demonstrate their language development over time. So in portfolios, we're gonna be knowing how they started in learning, how they developed the process they have been through. So we will be collecting all of those activities, and then we'll be looking on their improvements, if they have really improved, or if not, what works best for them. So portfolios are one of effective assessment that we could use. Okay, and collections of learners' work that demonstrate their language development. Okay, samples of written work, recordings of oral presentations or conversations. We also have self-reflections on language learning that could also be, right? And peer and self-assessments. Next, we have the peer and self-assessments. This is the opportunities for learners to evaluate their own language use or provide feedback to their peers, fostering self-regulation and collaborative learning. And then teacher-learner conferences, the one-on-one, or it could also be small group of discussions between the teacher and learners to provide formative feedback discuss progress, and maybe set learning goals, more objectives that you could reach, you could target, right? So I think this is going to be the last, the dynamic assessment. This is the dynamic assessment is also rooted in Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So, by the way, Lev Vygotsky is the main proponent of interactionist theory. Okay, so this emphasizes the importance of mediation in the learning process. So there should be a mediator. So learners will not just learn by themselves. There should be someone who is more knowledgeable than them to teach them, to guide them, and to instruct them of what they should do and what they should learn, more. Okay? Assessments that incorporate a teaching or mediation component, allowing the teacher to evaluate the learner's potential. Okay, all throughout the process, the teacher will be able to know, oh, this student has a potential for this one. So for language development and responsiveness to instructional support. And I think that will gonna be all for the language theories in line with the language testing and assessment.